Hey everybody, in this video we are going to tackle the final boss of sound synthesis, frequency modulation aka FM. There is plenty of great content on this topic out there, but chances are it will cure your insomnia instead of teaching you the ins and outs of this timelessly dated sound generation technique, so I'll try to explain it with memes. While frequency modulation was used in radio transmission technology for decades, one of the earliest musical applications were analog Buchla instruments in the mid-60s. However, the precision required for the FM synthesis we know but not necessarily love today is best delivered by digital sound generators, and it was quite a journey from John Chowning's 1967 Stanford patent to the notorious ePiano 1 preset being used in 40% of #1 singles on the US Billboard Hot 100 in 1986. Yamaha spent the entire 70s improving on Chowning's work, and it wasn't before 1980 that the first commercial FM synth, the GS1, was brought to the market, if you completely ignore what Synclavier was doing at the time. It is no secret that the technique achieved world domination through the rise of the iconic DX7, which, fun fact, is actually based on phase modulation, delivering mathematically similar results to FM for reasons a group of angry nerds will certainly point out in the comments. After the release of the aforementioned DX7 in 1983, it became the weapon of choice for emulating acoustic and electric instruments like bells, e-pianos and marimbas, only to be gradually replaced by sampling technology over the following years. At the same time, FM chips like the YM2612 found their way into arcade games and consoles, brainwashing an entire generation into actually enjoying the crude digital sounds up to this day. With a reputation of being cheesy and hard to use, FM synthesis almost fell into oblivion. Sure, the 1998 FS1R might be the pinnacle of traditional FM instruments, and plugins like FM7 and Citrus made the technology available to a younger audience in the early noughties, but it wasn't until the mid-2010s that a new generation of gear like the Korg Volca FM or Electron Digitone kickstarted an ongoing FM revival. The first and certainly not uncontroversial step to understanding FM is don't use a hardware synth. Hear me out. The oftentimes nightmarish UIs of classic synths are one of the main reasons for FM's bad reputation, and the visual feedback of software flattens the learning curve drastically. We are going to use Stacked because it's free, runs on literally every platform, and is fully DX7 compatible. At the core of every FM synth lies the infamous operator, equivalent to an oscillator on a normal synth. It traditionally produces a sine wave, but even some late 80s synths like the TX81Z came with more complex waveforms. We'll mostly stick to sines for educational purposes here. You need more than one operator for FM, and in its simplest form there is one you can hear, the carrier, and one you can't hear, the modulator, which gives the carrier meaning. The way in which it does that is very similar to how real musicians create vibrato on, for example, a violin, but faster. The relationship between the two is called ratio. These ratios define differences in pitch, and you can write them down quite similar to sports game results. 1:1 is a very common one. Both the carrier and modulator have the same pitch here, and the bigger the difference between the two, the uglier things usually tend to get. Extra points for choosing ratios with the modulator being lower than the carrier and not being afraid of numbers behind the comma. As you might have noticed, you can dial in the amount of FM nastiness by changing the level of the modulator. You can do this by hand or, for more musically satisfying tones, using an envelope. Just like on every other synth, these envelopes let you define the evolution of a parameter, in this case the aforementioned modulator level and, as a result, FM amount. In addition to the intimidating front panel UI, the envelopes of the DX7 might have been the other reason why FM has a reputation of being a serious PITA to program. Not only are they more complex than your usual analog synth ADSR, higher values also result in shorter times. Once you have figured this out, it becomes easy to create simple 2-operator patches like a crude bell sound based on a longer decay and 3.5:1 ratio, or a proto-hardstyle donk if you go with a 2:1 ratio and fast decay. That's more or less all you need to know about FM. Thanks for watching, see you next time. Just kidding, a few basic instruments like Yamaha Porta sounds aside, FM synths tend to have more than 2 operators. You can pull off classic patches like solid bass with only 4 operators. But many more nuanced tones require the 6 operators of the DX7. These operator counts above 2 are managed using so-called algorithms. Yes, that's the funny graphics on your vintage synth. All the operators in the bottom row are the carriers, you know, the ones you can hear. And the structure above gives you information on who modulates whom. While you can define custom algorithms on modern synths like OP6, the algos on most synths are fixed and offer configurations ranging from one heavily modulated carrier to a smorgasbord of 2 OP combinations. Everything you need to imitate a conventional 2-oscillator subtractive synth. Poorly, and some algorithms are more on the additive side. Speaking of other synthesis paradigms, there are things FM synths like the DX7 are missing, among them noise and non-sine waveforms. You can work around this by introducing feedback. Crappy FM snares, very digital sounding sawtooth waves. No problem. One of the main advantages of FM over simple sample-based instruments is its degree of expressiveness. The DX7 was shipped with a great keybed, and its patches relied heavily on velocity and aftertouch for people who could actually play. Let's have a quick look at how to refine your FM patches. Many acoustic instruments, like a grand piano, tends to produce brighter timbres once you play in the higher registers. You can emulate this behavior and countless things that don't occur
naturally upon our planet
by introducing keyscaling. Yes, that's the third diagram on the DX7. The LFO and pitch modulation work very similar to non-FM synths, and you might be surprised by the often ridiculous amount of chorus, reverb and delay it takes to make FM tones somewhat bearable. It goes without saying that FM synthesis has evolved since 1983. More waveforms, more operators and algorithms, and useful workflow improvements like macro controls, filters and internal FX. However, once you've wrapped your head around the basics of classic FM, everything else just makes your life easier. Time to analyze the most meme-worthy DX7 presets. E-Piano 1, the most overused synth sound of all time, but comparably easy to understand. It consists of 3 independent 2-OP tones, one of them delivering nosebleed-provoking 80s overtones with a high modulator to carrier ratio, and 2 1-to-1 pairs. Feedback is cranked on one of them to create some fuzziness, and 2 of them are slightly detuned for what they called organic feel back in the day. Classic. Bass 1. This one is more complex than you might think. Operator 1 is first turned into a mellow Sega Genesis bass by number 2. It is rounded off with another modulator, only to be transformed into a metallic abomination straight from the danger zone with a modulator modulating this modulator. In spite of feedback being at max, operator 5 and 6 don't do much except for adding a little more presence in the higher registers. A great keyscaling example. Referee whistle in arguably the worst DX7 preset. I only included it here to demonstrate the use of fixed frequency operators for sound effects and drums. Hope you liked this little meme-based FM tutorial. Feel free to like, subscribe, become a patron and use one of the links down below to support the channel regardless of which contemporary FM synth you buy. Thanks for watching and see you next time.